Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. I've been thinking a lot about NIS America lately. I've probably mentioned this before, but overall they're my favorite JRPG publisher. They produce my favorite JRPG series of all time, the Trails series. Some of my favorite action RPGs in the modern East games. They are just a company that produces banger after banger as far as I'm concerned. And I thought it might be fun to sit down, look at all of the NIS America games that I have played, and rank them in a tier list. They call it a tier list because it makes some people cry tears of sadness when they see where I've placed their favorite game. So please let me know as we go along, down in the comments, let me know if I've ranked one of these games improperly, if I've put it in a place that has made you angry. I want to apologize in advance if I do that. I will say, by and large, I don't think there's really any pure stinkers in this list. Maybe that's a spoiler. But yeah, none of these really strike me as being particularly egregiously bad. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the tier list. Why don't we? All right, so we have here 19 games that I've played, published by NIS America. I think that I have them all. I got this list. I compared my list of played games to the Mobygames list of all published titles by NIS America. So if I'm wrong, and some of these titles were not actually published by NIS America, or there are games that weren't on that list that I have played and I'm just not thinking of right now, I blame Mobygames. I'm just kidding. Mobygames is a great resource, and I would never disparage it, but it's their fault, not mine. Okay. So, we have the 19 games that I've played here. How do we want to do this? Do we want to start with the obvious ones, like the Trails series, or do we want to mix it up? Let's mix it up a little bit. Why don't we? I think we'll begin with a 3DS game. Okay. We will start with the Alliance Alive. Hopefully, many of you have seen this game either back on the 3DS, which is probably less likely, or more likely in the Alliance Alive HD remaster that they put out not too long ago. I have not played the remaster myself, but I did thoroughly play and enjoy the original Alliance Alive on the 3DS. It's a very, how do I put it? It's a very interesting world. It's got some cool world building and interesting characters that are complex, and a story with real stakes to it. And it's interesting in that it has sort of a modern sheen to it, but it plays and feels very much like an old school JRPG, like maybe a PlayStation era, or maybe even earlier. It is 3D, it's 3D polygons, but something about the way it feels, it strikes me as like an earlier style of JRPG, which is great as a throwback. I thoroughly enjoyed it. This was one that, because I reviewed it, I had it digitally, so I didn't own it physically, but I did go out and purchase the physical copy on the 3DS because I was like, this is a fantastic game. I need to have it in the collection. So it is on my shelf. And I'm going to put the Alliance Alive. It's an A rank for me. It's not going to be for everybody. The battle system is much more attuned to the style of like your Saga series, where leveling up is more like your stats increase at seemingly random times. You learn new skills by using existing skills. It feels very much like a Saga game, but it doesn't have any of the jank or frustration that I experienced personally in some of the much older Saga games. So take that for what it's worth. And if you are into that sort of thing, then even more reason that you should check out the Alliance Alive. Okay, let's talk about Atelier Iris. Atelier Iris is I believe, the first Atelier game that we received in North America. Is that correct? We didn't get Annie first. Annie was the DS game. I don't have Annie. It's the only Atelier game I don't own. but I'm pretty sure Iris was the first one we received. They, the series have been going for a while in Japan. There were PlayStation entries with Marie, which they just recently remade, and some others, but Atelier Iris was our big introduction. I played, how many hours did I get into this? Maybe 5, maybe 6 hours, and there's a lot that I like about it. I love the music. The music is just... the people that Gust, man, they produce some of the coolest music in JRPGs, period. They're so good, and it's so unique. Like, you hear a soundtrack from a Gust game, and even if you don't know what game it's from, you're like, that's a Gust game. Like, you can just kind of tell. It just has that feel to it. But none of them sound alike. It's weird. It's hard to explain. But as a musician, I really appreciate the sort of house style or house sensibility. I don't mean house in the like sort of sense, but like house, like, that development studio sort of style. So I really, really appreciate the music in Atelier Iris and all of the Gust games I've played personally. And I don't know. The graphical presentation, the old school like sprites on 3D, you think of the PlayStation 2 era and you think of, all the games moving to fully 3D polygonal graphics, which is cool. The PlayStation 2 had some amazing graphics that were definitely punching above their weight for the time. But yeah, the classic style of the graphics, the battle system is fine. It's okay. It's not my favorite. They definitely have refined the Atelier battle system over the years. The characters I didn't super connect with in the time that I spent with the game. So, considering I only played it for 4 or 5 hours before I dropped it, I can't rank it super high, despite the positives, which I do feel very positively about. But I would probably put Iris at a C. I would never call it a D. I don't think it's a game that deserves any sort of scorn, right? Not that any game in a D rank on a list like this deserves scorn, just that I wouldn't scorn it. I don't have anything against it. But it just didn't connect with me on every level that I needed it to. Has some very bright spots, though. Let's jump around a little bit more. What's next? Danganronpa 1 and 2 Reload. I put them together. I'm not sure, actually, I think NIS America published the original Danganronpa 1 and 2 separately, right? Let me know in the comments if you know the answer to that question, because I'm going to operate under the assumption that this is true until you tell me otherwise. Danganronpa is an amazing series. I've talked about it before, even though it's not strictly speaking a JRPG. It's a visual novel meets, it's not really a puzzle game, but like trial, mystery. It's hard to explain. It's not a visual novel in the sense that you're just reading text or listening to people talk. There is quite a bit of interactivity to it. The premise is you are a bunch of kids, or you are a kid with a bunch of other kids, trapped in some location by this megalomaniacal bear named Monokuma, who is forcing you to play a death game where the only way you can escape is by murdering one of your classmates and getting away with it. So what happens throughout the game, somebody turns up dead, and everybody else has to figure out who done it. And if they don't figure out who done it, then they all dead. However, if the person gets away with it, they get to leave. So, there's high stakes, lots of blood. It's all pink though, so it shouldn't turn your stomach. It's a nice Pepto-Bismol pink. So anyway, it's a crazy premise. I didn't know that like teenagers murdering each other was my aesthetic, but like it's just totally my aesthetic, man. I love it. It's super fun. It's over the top. It's goofy. It is very dark, but it doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's a fantastic series. Danganronpa 1 and 2, both of them are S-tier video games for sure. Just absolute bangers and a half. Okay. We'll go ahead and do Danganronpa V3, which is the official third, and I think thus far last entry that has come out. I know they did the Switch Danganronpa Decadence, which kind of combined the 3 games into one and had like a board game, mini game edition, summer camp or something. I have not played it yet. I do own it, but I don't think that it's canon, that extra stuff that they added, so not as interesting to me. But V3 is a mind-altering video game experience. It's a very controversial game, and the reason it's controversial is something that I can't get into on a channel that strives to be spoiler-free. So suffice to say, it is just an extremely divisive game in the community for what it does and what it says. And yeah, just its message is something that is hard to swallow, but at the same time, I really appreciate it. I agree with the message that it's presenting to the players to an extent, but it's a complicated thing. And my feelings are not really complicated about it. I know a lot of people's are. To me, it's another S-tier game, which is funny because it started out as my perfect Danganronpa sequel. By the end, it had totally changed into something that I just didn't foresee, but I still loved it. Like it didn't meet my expectations. If you want to think about it that literally, it didn't meet the expectations I had for it. It kind of tricked me, but I loved it. I loved being tricked like that by that game. That's just a very cool experience, and it doesn't happen very often in this or any medium. So V3, S rank, moving on. Okay, what do we got? Let's look at Trails from Zero. How about Trails from Zero? This is a tricky one. Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, in my mind, are the same game. I don't mean that they are identical, of course. I just mean that Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure are one story, one complete story arc contained within the broader Trails story. So it almost feels like it would be silly to rank them differently from each other. But if I am going to treat them as two separate games, if I'm going to say that Trails from Zero is a distinct entity and Trails to Azure is a distinct entity, I do think one of them is better than the other. And to me, that, just feels like the natural ramping up progression of a story. Like you ramp up towards a climax, right? Like things heat up and get better and more exciting, and then the story comes to an end. And Trails from Zero, like most other arcs in the Trails series, is sort of a foundational chapter that sets up what's to come. So to me, Trails from Zero is an A, Trails to Azure is an S. Is that fair? Like I said, in my mind, if I was doing this the way I would really want to, not as individual games, but as arcs in the story, I would put them both in S, because that's the story. That's the Crossbell arc. It's an S rank. But I'm not, and I'm treating them as two games, and less happens that's exciting in Zero, and Azure is just more exciting and is just a little bit better of an experience if you take it discreetly. So, all right, that's out of the way. All right, we'll leave Trails of Cold Steel until a bit later. Let's do Ys. Let's do Ys 8. Ys 8, man, that is just a heck of a game, guys. I don't know if you've played it. You should maybe. I love Ys 8. The music, obviously, Falcom just crushes it every single time. They're astonishingly good. The graphical presentation, especially, I had played through all the Ys games in order a couple of years ago, just to get the full Ys experience, because I'd never played any of them, so I went through the whole series. And just the glow up from the previous games to like 7 with the kind of the next step in the 3D graphics, all the way to 8, where it's just like, wow, it's just a brand new kind of feeling. It's great. I love the story. The story is actually really good. Like the prior Ys games, the stories were not the highlight for me. The gameplay was very addicting and fun and just felt really weighty and cool, and that's still the case. But the stories in most of the Ys games didn't really do as much for me, with the exception, I think, of Ys Origin and Ys 6. Both had stories that I enjoyed quite a bit. Ys 3 to an extent, the remake, of course. But anyway, Ys 8 was just a huge evolution in terms of the storytelling in the Ys games. Yeah, Ys 8 was just revolutionary for me. So I'm going to call it an S rank game. Ys 9 is less revolution and more evolution. It is a game obviously in the style of Ys 8, so it's not drastically different in terms of its gameplay, except in that as part of the monstrum, like you have kind of superhero powers, so the different characters can do different things, like glide through the air or like run up walls, all these different things that the different characters can do, which makes traversal very fun. You are mostly trapped in a giant city. It's a big city and there's a lot to see and do there. And there are a couple of outside the city areas that you can explore, but it's not as visually interesting to me. It was very intriguing to me on a story level. I don't know whether I would put the story above 8 or not, but it's right up there at the very least with 8. It's a very intriguing story. I wish Adol talked. I'll be honest. I wish he had a voice. You have plenty of opportunities to choose his dialogue, and I think that's fine. But have him voice the lines is my opinion. Falcom, could you please just have him voice the lines? I'm fine with picking everything he says. Just have him voice the lines, because it's weird. Everybody else is talking, and then there's this weird silence in the conversation, and then everyone carries on as if I've said what it is that I've selected. Can you just make him voice the lines? Like, he's saying things in combat. I'm not telling him to say, yeah, blah, like, anyway, please, I'm begging you, please. That would take an already great series and just elevate it that much farther for me. But anyway, stacking it up against Ys 8, I feel like it's an A tier. It's not quite at that S tier level, which is still, very good game, obviously. I highly recommend Ys 9 to anybody who enjoys the Ys series or action RPGs in general. I would just rank Ys 8 a little bit higher. Okay, what do we got? What's next? Let's look at Atelier Rorona. This is the only Atelier game so far that I've played in its entirety. Played all the way through it, saw the credits roll, and I gotta say, I enjoyed it. Like, it was a chill experience. There was a deadline. It's one of the older ones, obviously, so it has the time limit where you have to accomplish certain things by a certain date. Time limits in games don't really bother me, though, because when I have any sort of time limit in real life, I have to get the thing done right away. I don't procrastinate. I don't put other things in front of that thing that's a timed priority. I get the timed thing done right away. So, and maybe it gets harder as the series goes on, but for me in Rorona, I would just get the task done immediately. That would be my sole focus, get that task done. And then I would have days of in-game time to just go around and do whatever, and I would do that and take advantage of that and have a lot of fun. And I didn't have the time limit hanging over my head. So, I don't know, like I said, maybe that's not feasible in the later entries, but for Rorona, it certainly was, and I really enjoyed it. So, it's not the deepest game I've played. It's got an okay battle system. I think I enjoyed it better than Iris, but just okay, not life-changing. And the music, of course, is great. The graphical presentation, I guess, is cutesy, like anime style graphics, 3D, and it looks good. It's a PlayStation 3 game. You would expect it would look, pretty decent. It looks pretty decent. The story is nothing to get too excited about. It's perfectly serviceable. You're trying to save your atelier and become a great alchemist. I want to be the very best like no one ever was, sort of deal. So, I feel a little iffy about putting it in an A. I don't know that I would call it an A game for me. I would probably put it in B. I think it's a B rank. A brank. I think it's a brank. It's a B rank game for me, but it's very good, and I am going to play the rest of the series. I mentioned earlier, I have every Atelier game except for Annie, which I just should get to have so that I have them all. I don't have Marie, but that never officially came out physically in America. I could get it on PlayAsia, and probably will, but anyway. So yeah, Atelier Ramona, B rank. Moving on. Let's throw Cry Machina up here. Cry Machina is one that I purchased sight unseen because I knew it was coming from Furyu, and I knew it was a spiritual successor, if not directly connected to Crystar, a game that I'll be talking about shortly. Cry Machina is great in terms of its gameplay. The story is very intriguing. It's like a girl wakes up and she's suddenly in a cybernetic body, and it's like the distant future, and like she's been preserved as this android, and there's only a few humans left that are in similar android bodies, and there's these AIs that are kind of taking over, and she's got to fight. It's an interesting story. It's pretty cool, and it explores some pretty deep and interesting topics too. For me, the biggest issue that I had with it, though, it was an improvement in just about every way over its predecessor, except there was no dub in English, and that was just a huge disappointment for me. I was an enormous fan of the English performances in Crystar, and it really sold the story to me. So even though the story is interesting in Cry Machina, the characters seemed like they would be cool, I just couldn't connect with them because of the language barrier. And the localization itself was good. Like, you know, the translation, the subtitles were fine. I had no issue with the localization. It was just the lack of the dub kind of, I don't know, it pulled me down out of the experience. And because of that, and honestly that alone, I think it's a B for me, despite, like I said, all the improvements made to the gameplay. Having said that, Crystar is a top favorite of mine. The gameplay is not great. I'm gonna be real with you. It's just not. It's a little stiff. It's a little repetitive. The monsters are pretty repetitive and not very interesting. The levels themselves are just weird and samey. And it's, from every technical perspective, in terms of gameplay and graphical presentation, it's not great. But the aesthetics of it, the story, the music, the characters, the performances of the actors in all the roles, it just floored me. It's a powerful game. The premise, if you're not familiar, is a girl and her sister find themselves suddenly in purgatory, and shortly after arriving in purgatory, they don't know how they got there, they don't know how to get home. The main character accidentally knocks her sister off a ledge. Her sister dies in purgatory, which I don't know how that works. That seems contradictory to me, but that's what happened. And so she has to kind of forge a contract with some demons to fight back against the bad forces in purgatory, and doing so that will allow her to bring her sister back to life. So that's kind of the very basic premise, but it goes some places. The story goes some places. There are some twists in here that I legitimately didn't see coming and make sense and felt great. I love getting fooled. I think I mentioned this with Danganronpa V3, but like, I love getting fooled by a story. Like, if you can trick me, like, I'm not sitting there like some people trying to find, and I feel like my wife does this too. Hon, you'll have to tell me if you agree with me on this, but I feel like you are one of those people that tends to like think about what's happening and be like, oh, I bet you they're doing this, or they're going to do this. This is what's going to happen. I don't think about that stuff at all. So like, I'm just like, you know, tunnel vision on the story where we're at in this particular moment and just eating it up. And so when a twist comes along, like if it's a good twist, it will pop my brains, and I love it. And Cry Machina had some of those kinds of twists. It's an S tier game for me. It's an S tier. Let's look at Time and Eternity. Let's do it. Time and Eternity is a weird sort of evolutionary dead end. And I know I've used that term before to describe other games. But yeah, an evolutionary dead end is just kind of how I think of it in terms of high-def JRPGs. It had a really interesting idea. JRPGs were becoming more and more like anime with every successive generation. And what Time and Eternity did was, they said, let's just make it an anime. So what you're looking at is, a 3D world, but all of your characters, the sprites, they are all fully drawn and animated anime characters. So 2D animation on 3D backgrounds, and it's cool. The battles are cool. They're all one-on-one, so you play as these two gals. I forget their names. It's been a couple years since I played this now. And they're the same person, but they switch personalities, and so you fight enemies one-on-one, and the animation is really cool. The presentation of it all is really slick. It's not great though. Like it feels a little weird. It feels a little off-putting sometimes, and I kind of wish that there had been more exploration done for this kind of game, because it's just a really cool idea for presenting a JRPG, having this like you're playing an anime. Like, that's cool. I think that's a very cool thing. And games have anime aesthetics that are 3D and sort of look anime in stills or whatever, but you can tell you're playing a 3D game. Like, these were truly 2D animated cells, and it was very unique. So it would have been cool to see more games in that style. I'm wondering if this one just did poorly and kind of scared everybody off. Maybe it was an expensive endeavor to undertake, and so because it didn't sell well, other companies were like, we're just gonna pass on that. But it's interesting. It's a cool experiment in game development. I think it failed, but it failed in such an interesting way, and it's worth talking about, and I think it's something worth exploring. So any devs out there that want to jump into the 2D cell animated JRPG space, I will support you. I support you in that. I think that's a cool thing, and I hope somebody does more games like this. All right, Trails of Cold Steel. Let's get it out of the way. Trails of Cold Steel 3 and Trails of Cold Steel 4. 1 and 2 are by a different publisher, so I don't have them on this list, but I would similarly think of them as one story. Kind of two stories, like whereas most Trails arcs have a foundational chapter in the first game, and then a more action-focused, like execution sort of chapter. Trails of Cold Steel does it twice. It has a foundational chapter in 1, an execution chapter in 2, and then a new foundational chapter in 3. There's a time skip, and we're kind of establishing where the world's at and what's happening, new characters, etc. And then an execution chapter in Cold Steel 4. So, unlike Zero and Azure, I feel like both of these are S rank for me. Just because of how 3 and 4, and 3, I would say how 3 starts to bring all of the stories together. 4, I liken it to the Marvel movies, where you have Avengers Infinity War, where you see a bunch of characters show up from other movies and previous entries, and they're coming together, and it's cool. Trails of Cold Steel 4 is like Avengers Endgame, where it's just everybody is there, and it's astonishingly cool, because I mean, especially as I've been playing through all of the games in sequence this year in anticipation of Trails to Daybreak, being able to play through all of these games and get to the point where all of the characters are now coming together from across all these different arcs, and the story is just encompassing the entire area, like the entire place, the entire world I've experienced so far. It's very, very cool, and you don't get that experience in 4 without the setup in 3. And the setup in 3 to me is a lot more interesting than the setup in Trails from Zero, put it that way. So that's why I rank 3, despite being a foundational chapter, as an S. Okay. Persona Q, Shadows of the Labyrinth. I actually was surprised, and this is the one I'm least sure about. Did NIS America publish this in the US? Did Atlas not publish Persona Q? It showed up on their list on Mobygames, and I could fact check it. I could. All right, the Caligula effect overdose. This one surprised me. I kind of had, wouldn't say I had low expectations going into it. I kind of had no expectations, but it's a pretty interesting game. The characters are all trapped in this virtual world, so you are seeing everyone's avatars. They're real bodies. We don't know what's going on in the real world, but they're kind of stuck here. And it's interesting getting to know all the characters because you find out little bits about them and how they differ from their avatars. There's this whole collection of people who are sort of in charge, and they're all ostinato musicians, I think, something like that. But they are the bad guys that are kind of in charge of everything. There's a couple of artificial intelligences in there that are controlling people with music. And the battle system is really interesting. You sort of like can predict what's going to happen and plan out a bunch of moves ahead of time. And assuming your predictions are accurate, all the moves carry out and do what you want them to. But unexpected things can happen. And yeah, it's a really interesting combat system. It also has like a bajillion side quests. You can sort of recruit any character in the game to an extent into your party, which is weird. There's a handful of like Persona style like main characters that are in your group, but almost every NPC can join you. It seems like there's a lot of stuff. None of that stuff interested me. I didn't want to do any of the bajillion side quests, so I just kind of skipped that. But it's an interesting game. It's a little bit janky. It's not a full super polished AAA experience. It's a AA sort of game. I felt like it didn't keep me engaged as long as it would need to for me to rank it higher. So I think I would probably put it as a B. I've heard that the second game is better basically in every way. It's sitting on my shelf here, but I haven't played it yet. We'll get to it one of these days and we'll see. But yeah, there it is. Let's look at Yomawari Night Alone. I like horror games. I like the kind of cool projects that Nipponichi Software does, where they kind of let their team just go wild and make these small games that, are outside of their main series that they focus on or whatever, but like just let them be creative. I think that's cool, and every developer needs to do that. Like, that's a very cool idea. And I'm pretty sure Yomawari came out of that, as did the next game on the list that I'm going to talk about. Yomawari, unfortunately, just didn't really hit for me. I don't know, like, I really wanted to like it, and for whatever reason, I didn't connect with it. It's been, 6 years since I played it, so I don't have fresh memories of why I left it after maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. But yeah, I feel like I have to kind of put it down here because it just didn't hold me long enough to even have a particularly memorable experience with it. So, D. Not a bad game, and I know the series has continued and a lot of people like it, and I'm interested in seeing what the other games in the series did, and maybe even revisiting this one, who knows. So The Liar Princess and The Blind Prince, this is another one of those games, like I said, it's kind of like, they're like, hey guys, go nuts, like make something interesting and creative. I love the art style. It's a kind of a 2D puzzle platformer is not quite what it is, but like 2D puzzle story game. Like a storybook, sketches. It's such a charming game. I would call it an A. Some people get mad when I do this sort of thing. They're like, how could you rank that over this full-on RPGs, 80 hours, whatever? And my answer to that is, I think of video games the same way I think of like literature or films to an extent. like, not every piece of literature is a novel. Not every piece of literature is War and Peace or The Lord of the Rings, you know, or even The Hobbit. Not every piece of literature has to be a big, meaty novel. Sometimes a game is a novel. Sometimes a game is a short story, like this might be. Or sometimes a game is a poem. And you might even make an argument that it could be a poem too. Like a short, bite-sized experience that condenses its emotional presentation down into a small bite-sized chunk and feeds it to you. And whether you like it or dislike it, like, that's the experience, and you've had it. And I think one of the games that I talked about recently was The Longest 5 Minutes. And that was one that I felt similarly about. Yeah, how am I missing this one? The Longest 5 Minutes, guys. We gotta add this. I'm gonna add this to the list. That's stupid as heck. So there are definitely games on here. There are definitely games missing from this list. I feel bad about it. But I was going off of, unless I missed it, it could be 100% my fault. Let's not pretend that I'm some sort of super genius. I am not. So The Longest 5 Minutes. Speaking of games as poems, I consider The Longest 5 Minutes to be one of the peak poetic JRPG experiences I've had. I love it. It's beautiful and moving and full of compelling characters. It's great. It is a very bite-sized game. You'll probably beat it in a dozen hours. The combat isn't anything all that special. You are essentially playing back through the memories of a hero as he and the party that he's with are fighting the last boss. So the entire game is framed around this scene where you're fighting the last boss and you've lost all your memories. He casts a spell on you, causing you to lose all your memories, and you are gradually, bit by bit, recalling the adventure you've just been on to get to this point. And it's just a moving and really, really cool experience. So if you have a chance to play it, I would say give it a shot. Because if you can think of it like that, like it's a poem, like it's not trying to be this grand epic experience, it's trying to do a very specific thing, it's trying to get in and get out and give you that experience, I think you might enjoy it. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. I haven't looked at, making tier lists for, publishers before. But yeah, I mean, this might be something if you all find this interesting, looking at a catalog from a publisher and ranking the games. I would be very open to doing it again for, like Square Enix or, who else makes JRPGs, guys? I don't know. Capcom? No, they don't make JRPGs anymore. But you know what I mean. And we'll do it for some other publishers if you think it's interesting. If you think it sucks, then that's fine. Let me know. Don't worry about my feelings. I'm just some chump. Just some chump on the internet. But no, you guys tend to be very nice, and I appreciate that about you as an audience. You're all fantastic. If you wouldn't mind liking the video if you liked it, and if you're not subscribed, if you wouldn't mind subscribing, it just helps out so much with the channel, helps it find new people. I have a Patreon if you are interested in supporting the channel in that way. You can sign up for that, and we hang out in Discord, and it's fun, and I'd love to see you there. But regardless, your support in tuning in and watching the stuff that I put out is more than enough, and I really appreciate you, one and all. Anyway, I hope you have a fantastic week, and until next time.